No, it's so awesome to be here with you all tonight. I'm always amazed when I get to speak at places, and especially places like this. First of all, it's beautiful. We have a full room here on a Friday night, which is awesome. And just I think about all the different details, all the different pieces, all the different things that had to come together for all of us to be in this room right now. I mean, it's wild if you think about it. The fact that we're all alive at this point of history is nuts. I mean, just that odds alone is crazy. But then all the different stories of each one of you in these chairs right now and what brought you here tonight. You know, the friend that brought you here, the experience. Maybe you just drove by and felt like, man, I should head up there. Whatever that brought you here tonight. It's just amazing that we are all here. So I definitely think there's a purpose and a reason, intentionality why we're all here tonight. And I'm excited to spend the next few hours with you, getting to know you better and speaking with you. And so on that note, I want to start with a really deep question, something to get us started on the right foot. I want to start by asking, who in this room has gone through kind of a bad breakup before? Raise your hand. So very deep question. A few of us, okay. It is not time to share the breakup story right now. It's time for me to share my breakup story. So I raised that question because my senior year of college, I was dating a girl, and I went to Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California. Anybody know Westmont? It's a beautiful school. So I was dating this girl, and I was starting to ask myself, you know, is this the one? You know, where you like whisper it because you don't want anybody else to like, is this the one? You know, you feel like you're going to like scare the one away if you say it too loud. You know, I was beginning to wonder that question. And then she invited me to come down to San Diego to meet her parents. Right, big deal. I'm going to meet her parents for the first time. I think this is the one. You know, I'm very excited. And it was during December, and it was pouring rain. I mean, just pouring rain. And I was in this 93 Honda Civic hatchback, you know, that weighed like 7 pounds if I put bricks in the trunk. You know, so I'm driving down the 101 in the pouring rain. I mean, cats and dogs and like whales from the Pacific Ocean like landing on the highway, and I'm swerving, but I think I'm in love. So like, get me to San Diego, it doesn't even matter. So I make it to San Diego safe. I spend a day with her family, meeting the parents, do the whole family meet and greet, and everything goes amazing. I mean, it couldn't have gone any better. You know, mom loves me. The dad loves me. You know, I'm totally in with the family. And so I leave the very next day to drive back up to school thinking like, okay, you know, maybe I need to talk about it a little bit louder that this is the one, you know, like, okay, this is getting serious. So I drive all the way back up in the pouring rain again, and I get almost to Santa Barbara where I see these signs that says, highway closed, mudslide. So it was this big mudslide that hit the town of, right below Santa Barbara. I can't remember the name of the town, Kachina? It was right, yeah. It was one of those towns right before Carpinteria. It was one of those. But it demolished the highway. The whole 101 was closed. And I couldn't get back to Westmont. There was just no way at that point. So I'm like, well, what do I do? Well, I guess that means I should go spend more time with my girlfriend, right? God must be telling me to do that. So I drove all the way back down to San Diego again, spent another day with her, and then I figured out some back way to get to Santa Barbara from San Diego where you go like up some crazy back roads and you come on San Luis Obispo, and then you come south on the 101. It's just crazy long way. And it's pouring rain the whole time. And I'm getting close to Santa Barbara and I see more signs. Highway closed. Big accident. All lanes closed. So I get pulled off into a field. It's pouring rain. I've been driving for like 18 hours at this point over the last 2 days in the rain in my Honda Civic. Both sides of the highway are closed. I'm in a field. I call my girlfriend to give her the update, and she says, Paul, we need to talk. Right? This wasn't, Paul, we need to talk about how amazing you are and about our 2.4 kids. You know, it wasn't that, Paul, we need to talk. You know the Paul, we need to talk, right? Maybe you've gotten that before. Maybe you've said that before. She proceeded to break up with me right then and there on the phone in the field after I just met her parents in the pouring rain. I felt like I was in a Dawson's Creek episode. You know? And I just started laughing, but I was crushed, and you just don't even know what to do with yourself. And I don't know if you've been in that situation after a breakup where you get up the next day and you're just like, I guess it's time to crumple Oreos in a peanut butter jar and just start eating it, and like, I don't think I'm gonna shower for like a week or two. I don't care, Like, where's a Gilmore Girls marathon? I guess I'll watch Gilmore Girls now, It seems like that's something you do when you get dumped. I don't know. But that happens, and it happens in relationships, and it happens in different points of our life. When so much of your identity is wrapped up in something. And when that is gone, when that changes, when you get fired, when you break up, when somebody gets sick, whatever it might be, when something happens, it creates this huge transition. It creates this huge change. And for me, even leaving college was a big transition. College graduation, that was a big transition. And it felt, in a sense, at different points in my 20s, like I was going through seasons of breaking up. Not just with a person, but I was almost breaking up with a season of life. College, or hanging out with different friends, or living in a certain place. I was breaking up with that. Or I was breaking up, in a sense, with versions of me, versions of myself. College Paul, I couldn't be College Paul anymore, I needed to grow, I needed to change. And transition can be very, very tough. And so I don't know where you guys are at right now as you sit here, what you're going through, all the different stories in this room. Hopefully I'm going to learn more. But I think most of us, we're going through perpetual transition and change all the time. We maybe don't realize it at the time. Retrospectively, we can look back. But things are constantly changing. And transitions are constantly taking place. And transitions are tough. Change is tough. Do you know what our introduction to the idea of transition was? It was birth. That was our first transition. They actually call the last phase of birth the transitional phase. And that sounds so nice, right? Oh, it's just the transitional phase. Like, no big deal. It'll just be the worst pain you've ever experienced in your life. Everybody's going to be crying. That's when, as a husband, experiencing 3 births now of my 3 kids, I realized for the first time for myself, I wasn't even doing the work, but I figured out that I could start crying, I could throw up, and I could pass out all at the same time. If we have any biology majors, I'd love to talk to you, because I didn't know that was possible, that your body could do all 3. But it's so intense. It's so intense. And so as I talk to you guys today, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what happens when your life feels like it's changing, when you're in transition, when you're looking for that place in your life where things just feel normal again. I don't know if you've ever asked that question. When will things feel normal again? And for me, I always felt like my life was on this staircase where I was climbing one step after another. And up there somewhere at the top was going to be success. Whatever that looked like, up there somewhere was going to be my dream life, my dream job, my dream spouse, my dream house, whatever else rhymes with house and mouse. I feel like I'm a Dr. Seuss. But I felt like up there somewhere was going to be it. And this is kind of what I envisioned my life to be like in my 20s. Like I was going to leave college. Google was going to call me the next day because they've heard like this communication studies major from Westmont has graduated. We got to get them up to Google. This is kind of what I felt like my life would be like at different points in my 20s. Instead, it felt more like this for many different years in my 20s, and maybe you can relate. And in points in my 30s too, where I felt like I was less at Google and more in like a Stephen King novel or something. Like, this looks scary, dark rooms, dark halls, you don't know where to go. Sorry, I keep hitting my mic, I think. But just not this kind of life that I envisioned. And a lot of change, a lot of transition. And so this is more what I felt like as I went through that stage. Do you guys remember the book, Are You My Mother? Yes. Where that little bird's walking around saying, are you my mom? Are you my mother? That's what I felt like I was like, except I felt like I was still kind of this egg. Like I hadn't really fully hatched yet. And I was waiting to hatch, but I was like rolling myself around and asking everybody, like, is this going to be my life? Like, is this it? Like, how do you know? Like, who tells you, like, this is your calling, this is your career, like, this is your purpose, your passion, all these words that we talk about. I felt like I was this never-ending search for that. And so I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but I'm going to show you a quick video what I feel like, what I call some 20-something, 30-something problems are like as you go through this season of life.
So, you're a 20-something, which means you've got 20-something problems, like these. Number 1. You've moved 6 times in the last 4 years. You've had 6 jobs in the last 4 years. You've had 6 boyfriends in the last 4 years. You've had 6 girlfriends in the last 4 years. Or you've had no boyfriends or girlfriends in the last 6 years, and you're scared your boyfriending or girlfriending is broken. Number 2. You constantly have to figure out how to answer the question,
So what do you do for a living?
I'm currently in between opportunities.
Number 3. You've mastered the interview, "This is my dream job, nod and smile," for a job you don't want and can't believe you're applying for.
Yes, it has been my lifelong dream to be a used airplane part sales assistant.
Number 7. You've learnt the art of cubicle work, spending 1 hour of actual work to fill an entire day.
What? 7 hours and 53 minutes to go.
Number 8. You glare at your cat as you get ready for work and say,
I wish I had your life.
Number 9. Making a budget is completely debilitating. Even thinking about doing your taxes, debilitating. Buying groceries, debilitating. Cooking dinner, looking for a job, calling your best friend back, calling your mum back, picking up the phone at all, debilitating. So you watch 4 seasons in a row of The Walking Dead. Number 11. Every time you spend another $350 to be a bridesmaid or groomsman, a piece of you dies inside.
The wedding is in Reykjavik, and the bridesmaids' dresses are fuchsia meets burnt orange. I know you told me you're a size 6, but I told the bridal shop to bump it up a few notches after your latest breakup and all. But hey, who knows, maybe you'll find the one while I marry my one. That would be Toad's Fabs.
Number 19. You've discovered that the freshman 15 is nothing compared to the cubicle 50.
Oh no, this is so embarrassing. And I'm rolling. Actually rolling.
Number 20. You're stuck in between growing and grown. Not yet sure if you're a kid or an adult. Number 21. You have no idea where to go for answers. Yet you're 99% sure a road trip would fix everything.
So what do you want to do now?
Yeah, let's just go watch Walking Dead on Netflix.
All right. I cannot believe you actually bought that thing.
Yeah, I can't even reach the pedals.
Can you guys relate to any of those in that video? Anybody? A few of you? Nobody wants to admit it? Most of the things that were in that video were definitely from my experience. And that's me actually laying in my cubicle in my mid-20s as I was working on my cubicle 50. Just really frustrated with it all, really struggling with it all, and really wrestling with my faith and wrestling with God. And apart from the humor of it and trying to just figure out how to be an adult, adulting, trying to figure out how to be all grown up, was even some of the bigger questions of like, God, where are you in this? Like, do you have a plan for my life? Do you have a purpose for my life? Should I be asking these questions, or should I just be working? And how do you do this? What is the answer? Where's the syllabus for this? Really struggle with that, those big questions. And so for the last 10 years, I've really made this my life. I mean, this has been my passion, is trying to figure out the answers to these questions. Writing about this, talking to people, interviewing people, studying this, getting my master's, just doing everything I can to figure out, okay, what is going on? How do we move forward confidently in our future, into our purpose, into our calling, into our career? How do we feel like, man, we're really making progress? How do we do this? Because I felt like I learned some stuff in college, but I didn't feel like I learned that in college. I felt like I was missing quite a bit of that. And I love getting to help other people go through this process. And I'm still going through this process. Please don't let me confuse you. I am still going through this process. I'm still working on all of this. I'm still struggling every day and trying to define this and figure out, okay, God, where are we at right now? That's definitely a lie if anybody thinks, well, gosh, that person's got it figured out, right? Because that's never true. And the people that think they have it figured out are usually in the biggest surprise of it all, right? They're usually in for the biggest surprise. And I know I've done that at some points in my life too. But before we get to some of the things I'm going to talk about, some of the secrets, here's just some data points that's interesting for our generation especially, for 20s, 30s, even 40-somethings, kind of the data that's been coming out, is that the typical adult markers, those have been pushed back 5 to 7 to 8 to 9 years, depending on where you live. So you used to get married, on average it was 22, 23 years old, even 30 years ago. Now on average it's about 28, 29, 30. If you're in D.C., if you're in Washington, D.C. and you're married before 30, you're like, whoa, hold on, partner, like don't rush into things, It's totally different depending on where you might live, but these things are being pushed back. And so I know it doesn't feel like that sometimes when you're jumping on Facebook or Instagram, and again, it feels like everybody's got their life together, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And there's some unique challenges facing millennials. Probably a lot of us in this room are millennials. Typically, if you're born between 1980 and 2000, you would be classified as a millennial. But even for Gen X as well, the rising college debt is about $33,000 on average. Maybe some of you are way above, way below that. I know I'm still paying back my undergrad. So yeah, so I had some of that myself. And the income hasn't been rising with the increase in college tuition, right? I mean, that hasn't correlated. So it's been tough. It's been difficult, especially as the Great Recession kicked in and kind of leveled things. It's been hard. And I don't know if you guys have gone through that if you were looking for jobs during that season. It was a difficult season. It still is in some ways. 40% of unemployed workers are millennials. I'm just going to depress us all. That's my goal. Some 88% of minimum wage workers are 20 years and older, and 4 in 10 of those are college graduates. Because a lot of people will say, well, millennials are lazy, they're entitled, they're just not willing to work. Well, actually, no, the data shows that a lot of millennials are working minimum wage jobs, even with college degrees, to make ends meet, to make it get by, because they are not finding a job in their career field or what they thought they were going to step into. Again, a lot of transition, a lot of change, a lot of things not working out exactly like a lot of people planned. And this, just to depress all of us, to get us really down, this is from Pew Research about millennial generation. It's the first in the modern era, highest levels of student loan debt, poverty, unemployment, lower levels of wealth than any other generation at this same stage of life. And they're estimating that we're going to die earlier than everybody too. Isn't it just great? All the data coming out is just amazing, right? So I say all that to lead to this first point, and take this for what you will, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. But don't be afraid to get lost, and don't be afraid if you feel a little bit lost, and don't feel like you have to have it all figured out. And that might seem pretty simple. It might seem, oh gosh, I've heard this point a million times before. But it was a really big aha moment for me when I realized, all explorers have to get lost. All explorers have to get lost. If you're going to explore anything new, you have to get lost to do that. There has to be a certain point in time where you step off the trail, you don't exactly know what's around the bend, you don't know what's up ahead. God hasn't flown in that dove with the 7-part plan for your next 20 years. I was waiting for that dove for many years. I felt like, God, just show me the plans, And God was sitting there and saying, Paul, I'm not showing you the plans because I don't want it to crush you. If I showed you what it's going to take, what we're going to explore, it would be too overwhelming for you right now. So I'm just not going to show that to you. So stop whining at me to show you that. But I didn't realize that. That's right. All explorers, have to get lost. The biggest difference is that explorers, they get lost on purpose with purpose. They have this sense of intentional lostness. where they are purposely stepping off the trail and they're getting lost on purpose with purpose. So they're not just wandering all around. They're not just going wherever. They have a general sense of where they would like to go, right? They have a general sense of, hey, we're going to explore this area. We don't know what's there, but that's where we're going to head. And they bring with them guides, and they bring with them some sort of map, and they don't go at it just by themselves. But they're getting lost on purpose with purpose. This is a map way back in the 1800s of the United States of America, before it was the United States of America, but mainly showing the Louisiana Purchase. So if we go back to history class, Lewis and Clark, right? We've all heard of Lewis and Clark, most of us, exploring the Louisiana Purchase. I love history, and I'm reading about Lewis and Clark right now in a book called Undaunted Courage, which I just love. And I love this quote from Lewis, about Lewis, when he first stepped into this exploration process. The author, Stephen Ambrose, talks about Lewis and Clark and says that Lewis was entering into a heart of darkness. He was entering into a heart of darkness, which that's pretty ominous. And it was. No one knew what was there. No one knew what was in that area. But far from causing apprehension or depression, the prospect brought out his fullest talents. He was ready, intensely alive. And I share that quote because there is something amazing that happens when we go through transition, when we go through change, when we step off the path, where we feel lost, where we feel like we don't have it figured out. I feel like a lot of the times this is what happens. We become intensely alive. Our senses are so on point. They're so aware because you have to be, right? You have to be. If you're lost, if you're exploring, if you don't know the next step, you have to be, in a sense, plugged in more. And for those of us that, have faith and believe in God and follow Him, that's when we need the Lord the most. That's when we rely on Him the most because we don't know what our next step is. So we rely on Him. We rely on His direction, His comfort. It's a really intense season, but it's a really amazing season, full of fruit. And that's when we get clarity, and that's when we explore new things, and that's when we look back and say, wow, I was on the right path all along. I thought I was lost. I thought I was just exploring, but I was on this path, and God was directing my steps. I couldn't see it. I didn't know how it was all going to turn out, but God was doing the exact thing that He had promised, even if I couldn't see it at that exact moment. And that's definitely what happened with even Lewis and Clark. They went out and explored, and they made it all the way to the Pacific Ocean and back, and they went through all these trials. And I keep hitting my mic just to make sure you guys are awake. But they had to get lost first if they were going to explore anything. And there's this amazing thing that's taking place right now, especially this time in which we live, this time in history, this point in history, is I like to think about it as this. The gatekeepers in a lot of ways are gone. That said, if you explore, if you want to go down this path, you have to go through this gatekeeper, and this is the only way to do it. Right? So much of that has changed with technology, with the age that we live in. For example, for myself, I'm an author. And even 30 years ago, 20 years ago, there was only one way to be an author, right? You had to work on a book, find an agent, hopefully find some publisher in New York who's going to publish your book and get it into bookstores because that's the only way people buy books. That was the path. Those were the gatekeepers. But now, as you guys know, right, with social media and blogging, all the traditional path for me didn't work. I was able to get an agent. I was able to go to publishers. And they basically came back and said, you got to build an audience. You got to build a platform. You got to go a different route with this. You have to go a non-traditional path. And so that's what I did. I started my blog, All Grown Up, and I started this non-traditional path of growing this thing, and I kind of circumvented the gatekeepers. And so that's the amazing point of history, and the amazing thing that we're living in right now is there's so many different ways to get to that destination. There's so many different ways to do it in your career, in your given field. And it might not feel like that right now. I mean, you might be saying, Paul, no, there's still like the set way of doing things. There's a set hierarchy. There's the set things. And there are still some of that around, obviously. But there is also this nuance and this creativity and these things that can take place for all of us. If we're willing to look, if we're willing to explore, if we're willing to work hard and try a different way. But here's something I want to talk about for all of us. Whether you're coming here and you feel a little bit lost, or you feel like you're in transition, or if you feel like, no, I've got pretty steady, I'm doing pretty good, everything's lining up, one way or another, I want to talk about this point because it's so crucial and it's so important for all of us to hear. And this is the email that I receive the most. I get a lot of emails, and this is the most common email that I get, is I feel so alone. So with all those challenges I talked about, with not being able to get a job for millennials, or not feeling like I'm stepping into my calling, or, gosh, I've moved back in with my parents, or all my friends are successful, but I'm not. I feel so alone. And there's this truth that we really got to just realize and then speak the opposite, is that, we're all struggling. But too many of us are struggling to make it appear like we're not struggling. Right? Like that becomes kind of the goal. Is I know I'm struggling, but I'm almost struggling more to put up this facade that I'm not struggling. What's wrong? I'm good. No, I'm good, bro. Yeah, I'm good. Good. Everything's good. Yeah, good. Got a great job. Yeah, I'm killing it at work. Or oh yeah, my girlfriend's amazing. Yeah, it couldn't be better. And she just dumped you, but you're like, I'm good, man. Yeah. I got the engagement ring in my pocket. Like I'm gonna propose. Like, she doesn't know about that. We're not dating, but I'm just going to propose anyway, It's probably going to work out, And this is so important, and honestly, it's very, very dangerous. This metaphor hit me of, have I told anybody where I'm going? Like, does anybody know where I'm at right now? Does anybody know what I'm struggling with? Or am I trying to do this on my own? Am I trying to be this hero? Am I trying to be manly? Or am I letting people in? And that's really what it's about, warring for hope together so you don't fight this war alone. You don't have to fight this alone. You're not in this alone. And that's why it's amazing you guys are here. That's why it's amazing for anybody that takes advantage of, the small groups, the community groups you have, at Saddleback. Those groups, man, that's life-giving. That's the stuff of life. That's the stuff that gets you through these struggles. You can't lift the boulder off your own. And if you know Aaron Ralston's story, I'll ruin the ending if you don't. He had to cut off his arm to get out. And so it's much better if he would have told some people where he was going and they could have saved him instead of having to cut off his own arm, right? But for a lot of us, that's what happens. That's what happens. It's that intense in many ways. And I often say, we don't connect with each other through our pretend perfection. We connect over our shared struggle. We don't connect over our pretend perfection. We connect over this shared struggle to say, yeah, I've been there too. Oh man, I know what that's like. And for me, I definitely know what that's like because here's me in egg form again. I don't know what I have this like obsession with being an egg. I don't know. I just like the shape of an egg, I guess. But I left that cubicle, that picture, I was laying on the floor in the cubicle. I left that job and I moved down to LA because I was going to go be an author. I was going to go be a writer. I was going to go pursue my dream full time. I felt like that's what I needed to do. So I felt like that, what better place to do it than LA, right? Like I thought I would just like write something and then Alec Baldwin would be there and I'd just like hand it to him, by the Hollywood sign. And then I would be like a made-for-TV movie or something. Like I kind of thought that, that's what happens in LA, right? Well, not really, Then you go to Hollywood for the first time and realize that Hollywood is the most un-Hollywood place on the center of the earth, right? But we moved down to LA, and I moved in with some friends from college. We were in our mid-20s, and it was a group where half of us really had life figured out. They were training to be doctors and physical therapists and basically just killing it and then making us that didn't have life figured out feel pretty miserable about that fact. So it was me and a buddy named Mica. And Mica was super smart, talented. He was a biology major, much smarter than me. But he was struggling too. He was struggling to figure out, okay, what do I do with my life? What do I do with my career? Where do I go from this? And we lived in a town called Sierra Madre. Do you guys know Sierra Madre? It's off the 210. It's this funky little town by the San Gabriel Mountains. And it's like this mix of like the wealth of like Southern California mixed with like the hippiness of like a Woodstock concert, like all in one little town. And so we lived in this like bungalow house. There was 5 of us, and it was a really strange place. And right behind us, literally like our windows were almost touching, was our neighbor named Jane. And Jane was somewhere between like 45 years old and 80 years old. You usually don't give like a 35-year like guess on somebody's age, but Jane had done a lot of drugs in her life. So you couldn't quite tell like if Jane was going or coming or here or there. But she had long gray hair that went down to like her knees, and she would wear a t-shirt every day, and nothing but a t-shirt. And literally nothing but a t-shirt. And she used to be the hairdresser for Stevie Nicks, the lead singer of Fleetwood Mac. So for any 70s fans, you know, so she was always trying to invite us into her house to see a lock of Stevie Nicks' hair that she had in a safe. Jane also had a mannequin that sat on her porch and stared right at our house. So it just never felt like a great idea to like, oh yeah, Jane, let me come into your house to see some dead hair. Like that sounds like a scene from Misery or something. Like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to come out alive. Like it was just this really strange place to be living. And Mica and I were both trying to make it, but we were both just feeling like we were failing, and failing miserably. And failing at everything we tried. And I was trying to write this book that was my dream. I was trying to write a book to help 20-somethings. I felt like, man, there's a lot of 20-somethings that need like some hope and encouragement. I know I do. I'm going to try to write a book for this. You know, so I was working on this book, sitting at our kitchen table, and I'm just struggling at it. And as I'm working on the book, literally right next to us, they start this huge development project where they start clearing all these trees and just start clearing all this ground. And the town of Sierra Madre fought this for years. They did not want this development project to go in, but the development company won. So the town of Sierra Madre was super bummed. We were super bummed because there was like bulldozers right next to our window constantly. Not a very conducive environment to try to write a book. You know, it just felt like, man, this is really rough. And I would look up, I would literally be writing, and I would look up to see Mica, who was struggling to find work. So the only job he could get at the time was he was painting Jane's fence behind us. So he's literally on his hands and knees, and he's painting her fence as she's sitting there on a lounge chair with nothing but a t-shirt on, sipping lemonade and watching him paint and telling him everything he's doing wrong. And I remember thinking, man, we are, like, if this is not rock bottom, I don't know what is. But it was always at this time, you know, when I feel like the worst about my path and my journey and what I was doing, that I felt like this new kind of, a different kind of OCD takeover that I talk about. And I've alluded to this, but it's not OCD as we typically think about. You know, I call it, obsessive comparison disorder. Comparison's always been around. The Bible talks a lot about comparison. But now we have it in such a hyper state that it's unbelievable. It's unparalleled to any time in history, right? Back in the day, you know, it was always, I'm going to try to keep up with the Jones next door, right? Whoever the Jones were, they were like this amazing, perfect family. And you're trying to keep up with them. But now we're trying to keep up with kind of everybody's perceived life and perceived image and perceived whatever that's going on, whether it's online or in person. This kind of just too good to be true life. And I know for me, I can go to the grocery store and I can feel like, man, I'm doing great with my life. Like, I'm going to be like a real official adult today. I'm going to like buy kale and eat kale and other, arugula, like all-in-one salad, spinach. I'm just going to go crazy, and I'll feel all great. And then I'll get back in like the back of the grocery line. And of course, I don't want to talk to anybody in the grocery line because we don't talk to people anymore, right? It's just like, awkward moment, here's my phone. So let me get on my phone, and I go on Facebook and like, oh, look at that beautiful kid, and oh, look at the VP of marketing now, and oh, they got their beautiful dream house, and oh, okay, see ya, Kale, like, where's the pack of M&Ms, and where's the box of wine? I'm just going to box of wine and M&M this night, you start feeling terrible. You used to have to go to your 10-year reunion to look everybody up and down, right? To say, like, who's doing better than whom? And you just had to fake it for one night. It was amazing. Like, rent a BMW, rent a spouse, rent some kids. Like, Do whatever it took, just fake it for one night. And then you could go back home, you could get back on your parents' couch, you could do whatever. It didn't matter because you'd fooled them, right? But now we're trying to pull this off every single second with every single post, with every single thing, and it's just so overwhelming and it's not real. And we know this, I know this, and yet so much I still do it. And there's never a point. Even now, I have a couple books out, different things, and I'm jumping on Amazon and I'm comparing my books with other authors' books and how are they doing, There's never a moment, because there's always that lie that we think of, if I only get there, then I'll stop. Like I'll stop the comparison stuff because I'll feel totally fine then, when I get married or when I feel like I'm established in my career or when I sell this many books or whatever it is. But it just doesn't happen. Because we're not getting the root of the problem, the root of this comparison problem. And I know for me and Mica, that was happening constantly, especially with our roommates. Or that's when, of course, when the alumni magazine would come of our school, right? Isn't that fun to read when you don't feel great about your life? Like, oh, we got another neurosurgeon who's cured, some disease. Great. That's amazing. And so that takes me to my next point, that for all of us, the struggle is real. In many different ways, whatever you're going through, there's struggle, like I talked about, and the struggle is good. The struggle is good. It's so needed, it's so necessary, and let me explain that. For so much of my 20s and now, I always feel like, man, I want to find my purpose, I want to find this, and I want to do it on the easy path. I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel like, man, I'm just moving forward full speed all the time. But then I start realizing this truth that you don't find your purpose despite the struggle. You find your purpose smack dab in the middle of the struggle. And I'm going to talk about this more in my next talk after we go to break. We're going to go to break soon, and I'll come back and we'll talk about this more. But this idea that so many of us, we find our purpose, we find our passion not void of the struggle, but really in the midst of the struggle, in the midst of the transition and change. That's when we find it. And you see this time and time again. I talk about the dream and the promise and the path. You see this, played out in the Bible in so many different lessons and stories in the Bible. And this is just, two of them. David and Joseph, and there's so many more. There's Moses, there's Jesus, there's Paul. There's all these stories where, David gets the promise that he's going to be king of Israel. He's going to be anointed king. And Joseph has a dream that he's going to be the ruler. He has this dream with the coat, and his brothers are going to bow down to him. They both have these huge promises spoken over their lives, right? But do they step right into that promise right away? If you know your Old Testament history, the path, for David, it's just running for his life for years and years and years in caves and wilderness. He shows up from work as the harp boy, literally for Saul, the harp boy, and he's playing a great song on his harp, and then Saul's trying to pin him to the wall with a spear. Talk about a bad day at work, right? And then Joseph, he gets sold into prison by his own brothers. That's cool. Thanks. I thought I had family problems, but, that's kind of up there. And they were just glad they didn't kill him. That was them doing a good job. We didn't kill our brother. We just sent him to prison. And if these verses that you guys have in your handout, look these verses up. We probably don't have time to go through all these verses now, but it's these verses of the promise and then the path and what it took. And I loved reading, so much of the Psalms when I felt like I'm going through seasons of struggle. And I don't know if you guys are the same way, where David's lamenting and he's crying out to God. And Psalm 13 is one of those famous ones of like, God, why have you forsaken me? And you can understand it. You can understand what David's saying. You can understand the cry of his heart when he's like, God, I was told I was going to be king of Israel, and now I'm eating, grasshoppers in a cave with a bunch of dudes, Like, this is not what I thought the path would look like. But God is there the whole time, and he's like, no, I'm orchestrating the path. This is the path. You think you're on the wrong path. You're not. You're on the right path. I'm there with you on this path, and I'm training you, and I'm developing you, and I'm instilling you, the leadership ability, the character, the humility that you're going to need to lead later on. I'm instilling that in you because that struggle is good. That's the stuff that you got to go through. And we'll talk about more verses as we go through that. So less biblical story, and back to my story of Mica, MacGyver, and me. I say that because Mica and I would watch MacGyver like every day. Do you remember the old MacGyver? Like there's a new MacGyver, right? But we'd watch the old MacGyver, and we're sitting there watching MacGyver, and he can like save a village with like a tennis racket and a bottle of silly string, and like he saved like a whole village in Vietnam. He's like this hero, and you have us eating like a Hot Pocket on a Wednesday afternoon, like barely getting by. And again, I remember feeling like such a failure. But as Mike and I were in this house, we started to figure life out. We started to make progress. I was able to get an agent, and I was able to start making progress in my book. Mica had a new dream. He felt like he was going to be a lifeguard, and not a lifeguard at the pool, but like a lifeguard at the Pacific Ocean. Like he was going to be like a legit lifeguard. And he was training for that. And if you've ever known anybody, has anybody gone through that training, tried to be a lifeguard? It's crazy the training they go through. So Mica was training for weeks and weeks and weeks to get his endurance up, because they put you through these crazy tests to be a lifeguard. And then I was writing my book, and I was making progress, and my agents wanted me to send my book to target readers to see what they thought. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. So we send it to target readers, and I'm waiting for the feedback to come back. I've been working on this book for like 4 years at this point, so a long time. So I'm waiting for the feedback. And so Mica goes off to do his lifeguard test to hopefully be a lifeguard, and as he's gone, I get this email back from the target readers about the feedback about my book. So anxiously, like I open this document up, and the first page is what we love about this book. And it's all these amazing things. It's like, oh, we love this and we love this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I finally made it. Like I finally found some little piece of success, like this might happen, right? And then I go to page 2, and I notice a few things. One, the font dropped from like 12 to like 8, and then it went to bullet points, and then it was like 10 pages of everything they didn't like about my book. They didn't like my writing ability. They didn't like the story. They didn't like what I was wearing when I wrote it. They didn't like my mom. They found her online or something. Like they didn't like anything. And I remember feeling just crushed. And then Mica comes home, and I'm hoping like Mica, hopefully he has some good news, like someone's going to have to make it today. And he comes in, I can just tell on his face like he didn't make it. I'm like, Mica, what happened, man? And he's like, well, I went the wrong way. And I'm like, you went the wrong way? Like the Mica, the Pacific Ocean, like we just head west. Like what are we doing with our lives? Like we can't even, he's like, no, I made it there. I was doing the test, and I was swimming, and all these like high school girls were passing me, and I got flustered, and I turned the wrong way around a buoy, and I went the opposite direction, and I finished dead last. Dead last out of everybody. So again, we felt like failures. We felt like we were failing at everything we were trying. And that night, something even crazier happened. I've never been close to a wildfire before, but that night that changed too, which is just nuts. So our roommate calls us upstairs, and he's like, guys, you got to see this. And we look up the San Gabriel Mountains, and we see some flames way up there. And we're like, oh my gosh, is that a fire? And as we watch these flames, it starts growing and getting bigger. And it's on top of the San Gabriel Mountains, and Sierra Madre is right on the foothills there. And it's getting bigger and bigger, and we're like, oh my gosh. And so all these firefighters start coming, and they start evacuating people from the houses. And all of our roommates leave, except for Mica and me, because we're like, this fire is the best thing we have going for us right now. Like, we are not going to let this fire out of our sight. Like, we're going to stay here. And we're going to be those crazy guys, like, saving our house, like with a hose, saving the house we're renting, Like, you will not take this house for our landlord who we've never met, But Mike and I, we sat on this ridge, and this fire got closer and closer. And if you've ever been close to a fire like that, it's wild. It was so bright. It was like midday. We could see each other clearly. And these trees would explode, and it would sound like an airplane taking off. It would just be like, it was this huge explosions. And Mike and I are looking at each other like, when do we need to get out of here? Like, when is this becoming super dangerous? Like, I'm not recommending you stay close to a wildfire, in case anybody's wondering. But it was just wild to see this fire come down. And finally we get to a point where we get off this ridge and we're standing on the corner and firefighters are everywhere and there's this like band of neighbors that have stayed. And of course Jane is there. Remember Jane? And she was wearing pants. It was a big day in the town of Sierra Madre. Jane was wearing pants. So we're watching this fire come closer and closer, and it is a direct shot right for our house. And we're standing there with like our stuff, and we're watching this fire come, and we're across the street, and the whole entire fire gets put out. The whole fire gets completely put out, and it singed this last bush that was literally 10 feet from our house. And it wasn't the firefighters that put out this fire. It was this big land development of all the trees that they had cleared to build houses that they hadn't built yet. This huge space of dirt that the town of Sierra Madre fought for years that they hated became this huge firebreaker and protected the whole town of Sierra Madre, and not one house was burnt. And I remember looking at that bush and thinking about it and just thinking about my own life and being like, man, there was so much failure there. Like everybody felt like this was one giant failure because even the development company had gone bankrupt. They weren't even building houses there. It was just dirt and cement. But that thing was somehow perfectly planned and placed to protect us all at that very moment. And a couple years later, Mica, who would get a call the next day to ask him to try out to be a lifeguard again. Because the head lifeguard, his boss, said he saw something in Mica that he didn't see in other applicants. And even though he did the worst, he wanted him to try again. And Mica did. And 2 years later, Mica did something that his boss would later say was the most heroic act he's ever seen a lifeguard do in his 25-year history of being a lifeguard. Because Mica saved a teenage girl drowning. And I remember hearing that story and looking at the book of mine that later would get published. And I remember seeing Mica paint that fence, painting Jane's fence, completely off path, completely lost, wondering, God, where are you? And I feel like I see God there with him now, saying to him, Mica, dude, I'm preparing you, man. You are growing so much character right now. You are growing so much perseverance. You're growing so much humility. You're going to be the guy that stays late at work, that volunteers for extra assignments, and you're going to be the guy that's going to be in the perfect place to save a girl's life 2 years from now. But I'm training you right now, Mica. Just hold on. Just hold on, buddy. And for each one of your lives, how can that be true for your life right now, where God is preparing you? He's getting you ready. If things aren't working out exactly like you planned, like, man, God does have this perfect plan. He hasn't forsaken you. He hasn't left you. And I love even David's Psalms. He's lamenting and saying, God, where are you? Why have you forsaken me? But always around the end of the Psalm, he usually says, but I know that you love me and I will trust you anyway, even though I can't see it right now. That's what faith is. And so I think it's a really true concept, and I know we talk about failure a lot, but it's just that failure doesn't ruin your story. Failure really helps you write your story. That's a big part of your story. And in every story that we love, there's this concept, that writers talk about, screenwriters especially, they talk about the end of Act 2. If you ever taken like a writing class or a screenwriting class, they talk about the end of Act 2 because at the end of Act 2, everything falls apart for the hero. Everything falls apart. Like nothing goes to plan again, like that story. And then everything gets redeemed in Act 3, right? But you can't have any redemption if nothing's fallen apart. That's the whole point of redemption. And so that's so true with failure. And people ask me all the time, Paul, how do I find what I'm truly passionate about? And I say, gosh, it actually is pretty simple. You fail at something, you fail miserably at something, nothing goes as planned, and yet you want to keep doing it. You want to keep trying. There's something about it that speaks to your soul. There's something about it that speaks to the way that you're wired, that you're like, man, even though nothing in reality is saying this is going to work out, I'm going to keep trying this thing. And I know for my life, I've had lots of things not work out, and I've quit them pretty quickly. Like, okay, it didn't work, I'm not going to do this anymore. But writing for me, writing books and trying to help specifically 20-somethings and 30-somethings, that was that one thing that I could not do. I just couldn't shake it. Even when every publisher rejected me, I literally went through that story of 10 to 15 publishers rejecting me. But it became something that I could not do. And then a few years later, the publisher that rejected me twice didn't even know they had rejected me. It was Zondervan. And then they ended up being the ones that published my book without even knowing that they had turned me down 3 different times, years before. But it was, again, that redemption part. I was getting trained. I was learning what I needed to learn in those moments. And this is one of those verses that speaks to that failure, I feel like. That speaks to transition. That speaks to those moments where nothing was working out. And it's, Paul talking about that we rejoice in sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope, and hope does not disappoint us. So it's that idea of this deep-rooted hope, and when I talk about warring for hope, like literally you're warring for hope. You're warring that, God, even though nothing is working out like it's planned, man, God, you're there, and I'm hopeful, and I have faith in you. And at the end of this verse, suffering and perseverance and character, it's not like it ends with and you will get a 6-figure job, and you will marry that dream person. It's no, you will get hope. You will get hope to be able to say, even so, I will praise you, Like that, the old hymn, all is well with my soul. After that hymn, if you know the story of the hymn, his daughters had died. And his wife maybe had died too in a going overseas in a ship, and his family had died, and the weight of that was hitting him, and he said, even though, all this happened, even so, it is well with my soul. That's that hope that does not disappoint. And there is something of strange significance that happens to us when we're stripped of everything we used to depend on. And again, it puts us in that place where we're like, God, okay, I'm ready. I feel so uncomfortable right now. And if you want to do, if we want to do these kind of big things we want to do, we want to make an impact, or we want to dream big, or we want to do all these things, we have to get very comfortable with being very uncomfortable. You have to be very comfortable being very uncomfortable. It's really hard to change the world while staying comfortable in the process. Show me that story. Show me that story. Show me that story in history of somebody that stayed perfectly comfortable, felt like they were in their safe place, like they're going just through the motions. Oh, and I'm also changing the world and making a huge impact. It rarely happens. It's in a very uncomfortable place that most of the time that happens. So with that, this is about break time. You guys are probably like, oh my gosh. Can't let me stretch my legs, get a break, stop talking. So let's take a break.